Welcome to this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today I speak to Darren Mckenzie, who is the communications lead at Global Canopy. This is a data driven not for profit which targets the market forces destroying nature. They aim at improving the transparency and accountability of for profit corporations with the aim of reducing deforestation globally. Tune into this episode to listen to their various initiatives to tackle deforestation. And do not forget to share and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on to talk about Global Canopy.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
What was the idea behind Global Canopy?
So Global Canopy was formed about 20 years ago by a group of forest scientists who basically loved tropical forests and wanted to protect them. I suppose it soon became clear to them that in global economic terms, forests didn't really have a value as an asset. So forests were worth, and probably are still, are worth more dead than they are alive, because the land on which forests stand can be turned into farms and pastures that you can make money from. So our organization, I suppose, has now sort of transformed itself into a data-driven not-for-profit, and our aim is to be at the forefront of the fight to end market-driven deforestation and nature loss. So what we do is we provide data, provide tools, we provide guidance that can be used by companies and can be used by financial institutions and can be used by governments to help them make better decisions, to help them make nature-positive decisions.
How exactly is the world economy impacted by nature loss?
So there have been lots of studies on this. I mean, the latest study found that more than half of global GDP, so $58 trillion, is moderately or highly dependent on nature. But in reality, that's a bit of an understatement. Everything is nature dependent. I mean, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the clothes we wear, they all have their basis on nature. And the other thing that happens every year is the World Economic Forum. They publish a global risks report saying, what are the biggest risks facing humanity? Environmental risks make up 5 of the top 10 recognized risks over the next 2 years. Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is the 4th biggest risk facing humanity. I mean, you can break it down even further. So rainforests create rain. I mean, it's in the name. If you cut them down, you generate less rain. So that is currently causing droughts in places like Latin America. Landslides are more common in areas where ground has been cleared and where trees have been destroyed. That causes more landslides. Wetlands, mangrove forest, peatlands. They are amazing natural defenses against flooding. And then, I mean, I suppose the last thing and the biggest thing is having a look at climate. And nature is our biggest ally in the fight against climate change. There is no way for us to reach the Paris climate targets if we do not stop nature loss. The UN says natural climate solutions, things like preserving and restoring forests, they can provide up to 1/3 of the solution to limit global warming. I mean, if you look at the Amazon rainforest alone, that absorbs 5% of all of our carbon emissions in the world. So nature is, I mean, it's life itself. That's why we have to protect it.
What role do financial institutions have in tackling nature loss?
Finance is key to everything in our global system. We at Global Canopy focus a lot of our work on financial institutions because financial institutions are uniquely placed to influence companies to shift their practices towards becoming nature positive. Okay, so financial institutions provide capital, they provide loans, they provide investments, and that gives them leverage over the companies that they finance. And what that means is that financial institutions can, if they wish, kind of take a lead in driving change. So if we have a look at some of the data things that we provide, so the Forest 500 is one of our projects. It looks at the 350 companies most exposed to deforestation, so the ones that cause the most deforestation, and then it looks at the 150 financial institutions that give them the most money. Those 150 financial institutions give those 350 companies $6.1 trillion in loans and investments. That gives those financial institutions so much power to drive change and to make companies change their decisions and change what they're doing. We've just done some work over the last few years. We've been doing some work in the UK on pension funds. The pension funds are the biggest group of asset owners in the world. In this research we did with Make My Money Matter and Systemic, we found that £2 in every £10 that you save into your pension could be funding deforestation. So the idea of a pension is to, protect your future, when actually £2 out of every £10 could be damaging the very future that it's supposed to be protecting. So that is why, for us, financial institutions are at the very kind of heart of this problem and can be a huge part of the solution. And that's why we provide them with data, with tools, with guidance that can show them how to become nature positive, how to make their portfolios deforestation free.
In September this year, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures was officially launched. Global Canopy was one of the founding members of this initiative. Could you just elaborate about what this project was about and how did Global Canopy contribute to its production?
Yeah, so the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or the TNFD, is a huge first step. So what it is a set of, and this is going to sound quite business speak, but it's a set of disclosure recommendations and guidance for organizations to report and act on involving nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. So as I said, that sounds a bit like a mouthful, but if we take a step back, companies and financial institutions are asked to report and assess their climate emissions. In the UK, they actually have to, so it's law. So they have to say, they break it down to scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, but they have to say, right, if I do this activity, it releases this amount of carbon into the atmosphere. For a long time, there has been a need for a similar reporting mechanism for organizations to report on nature, how much they depend upon nature and what they're doing to it. Some organizations already were reporting on their impacts and dependencies on nature, but no organization was doing it in the same way. So everyone was reporting on sort of different metrics, and there was no way to compare and contrast to work out what entire sectors were doing. So alongside the WWF, the UNEP-FI and UNDP, we helped found the TNFD. And the idea behind it is it's a single framework that everyone can follow that standardizes the process. So organizations can report and then you can compare. It's more complicated than climate. Nature is much more complicated climate, because nature is huge. I mean, if you think about it, there's climate, you're measuring emissions. Nature, there's water, there's oceans, there's forests, there's aquaculture, there's agriculture, there's plastics, there's just so much, so many things that an organization has to look at there. So what the TNFD did, and it launched its final framework in September, was there is now this system and this reporting framework so that organizations can say, this is my dependency and impact upon nature. What we've been doing over the last couple of years is we've been helping sort of pilot it, basically so that it works, so that organizations who are taking part can use the metrics and the frameworks that the TNFD recommends and make them practical, make them scalable. And that's what we're doing. We're also experts in our field. So we've been providing sort of expertise and help as a knowledge partner as well.
Global Canopy also works on another initiative called Encore. So could you elaborate a bit about this?
So what we try and do as an organization is we provide data, tools, and initiatives and guidance to help companies and financial institutions change what they do so they can become nature positive as opposed to nature negative. Encore is a perfect example of that. It's a freely available online platform for nature-related risk materiality assessment. Again, it sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but if a financial institution wants to be part of the solution, they've got to understand their impacts and dependencies on nature. They've got to work out how much they rely upon nature and what they're doing to nature as part of their business. So Encore is the go-to platform for financial institutions and businesses to get a complete and comprehensive overview of their impacts and dependencies, the risks and the opportunities that they face through their interactions with nature. It's used, as I say, by financial institutions. It's been used by central banks to look at their economies. It's also a recommended tool by the TNFD. So the TNFD says you can use Encore to help assess your nature-related risks and opportunities.
Global Canopy is also working towards improving the transparency of global supply chains. Could you just talk a bit about this?
Global supply chains are incredibly complex and incredibly opaque and incredibly difficult to follow. And for a long time, that has been part of the problem. I mean, once again, I'm going to focus on deforestation because it's quite a good entry point. So deforestation is in your food, it's in your fashion, and it's in your finance. So in very simple terms, deforestation could be in that chocolate bar that you're eating because the cocoa in the chocolate bar was grown on a plantation in the Côte d'Ivoire that was on recently deforested land. So that's relatively simple. But if you look at soap and toothpaste, part of the ingredients of soap and toothpaste is palm oil, the third biggest driver of deforestation. The leather in your belt or in your shoes, the leather in your car seats could come from cattle raised on pasture land that was once forest. And then if you have a look at soy is the second biggest driver of deforestation. 80% of soy that's produced around the world becomes animal feed. So you could be eating a free-range chicken from a UK farm, but that free-range chicken could be fed on soy that's come from land that was once part of the Amazon rainforest in Latin America. So global supply chains, complex, opaque. The financing behind them is even more complex. It's not a straight line. So one of the things we do is our Trace program, which is a partnership with another environmental organization called the Stockholm Environment Institute. And it maps in incredible detail those supply chains. So it shows the regions where commodities originate and tracks where they end up. So even if leather, for example, is exported into Europe, so imported into Europe and then exported out of Europe into China, the Trace program maps that. We can track that trade. So what that does is it connects consumer markets with the origins of what they consume and where it comes from. So then you can use that Trace data to work out if that supply chain is part of the problem. A financial institution can use that data to then engage with a company involved in that supply chain and get them to ensure that the products that they're importing or that they're exporting are not part of a deforestation problem.
Great. And one more of your big projects is the Forest IQ project. So could you just talk about this also?
What we like to say about our projects is that they are solutions focused. They give answers to companies and to financial institutions and show them how they can drive change. Data is key. For a really, really long time, one of the reasons financial institutions said they couldn't act on nature loss and deforestation was because there was a lack of data. On deforestation, that is no longer the case. In 2023, that cannot be an excuse. In fact, deforestation data is perhaps the strongest in the nature space. But there's a lot of disparate data out there, which means it's in separate places. What Forest IQ does, we've launched a beta version of it. It will be fully launched in November. But what Forest IQ does is it brings this disparate data and puts it all into one place. So it brings together the most comprehensive corporate performance data on deforestation. So it means, financial institutions, your different financial institutions don't have to go around digging. It brings together Trace data, it brings together Forest 500 data, it brings together data from ZSL Spot, it brings together data from the RSPO. All of this data goes into one place so that then financial institutions can use it and create sort of company-specific engagement policies that can drive real change.
Global Canopy was at COP15 and COP27. How was that?
It's really important to be at those kind of events because it is essential that our message is heard. So deforestation is responsible for 11% of our carbon emissions. There is no way to reach net zero without action on deforestation, which means we have to be at climate conferences so we can say, yes, you are taking this action on climate, but you also have to take this action on deforestation. Otherwise, it's not going to be enough. I just said, I'll repeat again, there is no way to net zero without action on deforestation. So I suppose those kind of events are where policymakers and financial institutions and company bosses are. So it provides a platform and a location for us to go and say, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to change. And at different at these different events, big things have come out. I mean, COP15, the Global Biodiversity Framework, that is a big, big step forward. It's not perfect, but it's a really big step forward in the nature space. People were calling it sort of the Paris moment for nature. We need these things because from our point of view, not from our point of view, the reality is you cannot tackle the climate crisis unless you are also tackling at the same time the nature crisis.
So how can individuals contribute to Global Canopy?
So we are a not-for-profit organization, but actually 2/3 of our funding, our income, comes from institutional funders, governments of Norway, UK, Germany, Switzerland, and their sort of specific funding for our tools, our data, and our guidance. The bulk of the rest of our funding comes from sort of big trusts and foundations that, again, give us money for specific projects and specific things that we do. So it is possible for individuals to help us, but actually the best way individuals can help us is by ensuring that your politician, your bank, your pension is thinking and cares about the things that we think about and we care. We need governments to create anti-deforestation laws. And the way governments create anti-deforestation is if enough of the population say, this is really important, I don't want my the products that I buy in my supermarket to come from deforestation. So speak to your MP, speak to your politicians, speak to who represents you and say, enough is enough. We don't want any more deforestation. The same is true for your bank, your pension fund. Ring them and say, hello, I don't want the money in my pension fund to be funding nature loss. What are you doing about it? And by putting that kind of pressure, that kind of consumer pressure is really important and can have a really, really big impact. It is possible for us to solve this crisis. I don't want to get despondent about it. Deforestation, nature loss, these are solvable crises, but it requires action. It requires action from governments. It requires action from companies. It requires action from financial institutions. And it also requires action from us by just demanding change.
And that is my final question for the interview. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you.